The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you are now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am, of course, your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Tuesday, June 28th, 2016. Thank you so much for joining us. A lot happening in the news, as always. I want to cover really the things that happen just before the show sometimes are the most interesting things, and I have to scramble and put something together. Just before the show, I got someone tweeted me a copy or a link to a Reuters survey of over 16,000 people. And out of those 16,000 people, they surveyed them on racial attitudes. And this particular article focused on the racial attitudes towards African Americans. And as we'll discuss later on in the show, Hillary Clinton supporters rank right about around John Kasich, Republican John Kasich, in terms of negative and racist views of African Americans. This is consistent with a survey that I reported on back at the beginning of June, several weeks ago, from the ANES survey of 1,600 people online that showed that Hillary Clinton supporters were more racist than Bernie Sanders supporters. I took that particular video down because it was a simple cross-section analysis, and it really wasn't. It hadn't been. I wasn't confident in the data. And because I wasn't confident in the data, I took the video down. However, I think I'll put the video back up and put an addendum to it that Reuters has also come out with a survey. And the findings are, I can't say consistent because that's a very specific word, but the findings are similar. That's the word I'll use. So I want to talk about that. Also, I'll be speaking with Anoa Changa. She just got through with The Way with Anoa, so big ups to Anoa for doing what she does. She's going to come on and help me unpack the Supreme Court decisions a little better than what I did last night, which isn't too difficult. And then last but not least, I'll be speaking with Rania Khalek about the letter that friend of the show, Bakari Sellers, wrote to the Democratic National Committee, signed by 60 black Democratic officials, politicians, and it was in opposition of Bernie Sanders' language on Israel and Palestine. Now, this has kind of been an ongoing thing today. So we'll talk with Rania about it. The invitation has already been spent. I've already spoken to Bakari. He is out of the country, and they're, I think, 6 hours ahead of us right now. So when he comes back, we'll have him on the show, or he may want to get on the show tomorrow. So we're going to hear from both of them. And he already knows I disagree with them, right? So there's no equivocation there. I disagree with his position. However, just because I disagree with someone doesn't mean that they are my enemy. In fact, I consider him a friend. So we're going to bring him on the show and talk to him. And then also Rania Khalek and Bakari Sellers have agreed to both be on the show and have a discussion or a debate on the issue of not only the issue of this letter, but I'm sure it's going to evolve into a general conversation on Israel and Palestine. So that's going to be an interesting conversation as soon as we can piece that together. So that's what's happening tonight, and that's what's coming up in the future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think I'm going to break all the rules, right? I'm going to break all the rules, and I'm going to take this caller. Caller, you're the very first person to call. What do you want to talk about? What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hello?
Yep, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
My name is Justin from Oklahoma City.
Hey, how's it going, Justin? What's on your mind?
I have two questions, kind of about like the black voters in the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm only 18, and the last election I didn't really understand the magnitude of everything. And most of the black voters went to not to Hillary Clinton, to
Barack.
Barack Obama, but this time around they go to Hillary Clinton. I just don't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, when it comes to Bernie Sanders, I'm black and I voted for Bernie Sanders in Oklahoma, but is it because they didn't like his policies, or they just didn't like Bernie Sanders himself, or if there was like a minority that was said the exact same policy position, would he have won the minority vote? That's just my question.
Oh man, that's just your question. Like those are questions I can answer in 3 minutes on air, man. I have series of videos dedicated to that exact topic. So thank you for the call. I'll try to answer them as succinctly and quickly as I can. But let me clear the line. So, why did Hillary? That's a huge question, man. I've been talking about that for 6 months. So can I succinctly say why the black vote went to Hillary Clinton? Relationships. I'm going to give it the most positive spin possible. And it's not just a spin, right? I know it's based on relationships because of the black people in my life, the older black people in my life, whom I love dearly. Not my family. My family went Bernie Sanders all the way. But friends of my family, and no, actually, I consider them my family down there in Daytona. They are my family, and they just kept telling me about how long they have had a relationship and a connection to the Clinton family. And there are a lot of black people around the country who can attest to having some type of personal interaction. I mean, when you're on the national scene for 30 years, it's very likely, and you're involved in your community, it's very likely that at some point you've had a positive interaction with the Clintons, because that's politics. So relationships, and we can't negate that, right? We can't erase that, because that's the one thing that Bernie Sanders simply did not have in the black community. He did not have 30 years worth of relationships, and so we can't just dismiss that. So that's number one. Number two, it's because of just name recognition, and whether they had a personal or a professional or a political relationship with the Clintons. They knew about the Clintons, and they had no idea who Bernie Sanders was. Now, those are the two positive ones. I'm gonna give you all the false narratives. Three, the false narrative that they ran that Bernie Sanders has a minority problem. That was a concerted effort by the media from day one. They ran with that, created the Bernie Bros narrative, and tried to show and demonstrate that Bernie Sanders supporters had a problem with race, and Bernie Sanders himself had a problem with race. Now, I'm actually glad you asked that question, because now I can tie what you asked directly into the survey data, two different surveys that demonstrate that no, it's not Bernie Sanders' team that has a problem and followers who have problems with race. In fact, it's actually Hillary Clinton's supporters who have a problem with race. So there was a narrative about race, and then there was a narrative of meritocracy, right? This idea that Bernie Sanders wants to give people something for nothing. And it is deeply rooted in the black community that you have to work twice as hard as anyone else, right? And so as a result of that, also comes sometimes a negative downward look and downward gaze on people who don't have. And the calculation in our head, the reason they don't have is because they didn't work hard enough, right? So meritocracy runs deep in the black community. Let's not pretend. Conservatism runs deep in the black community, right? So Hillary Clinton's ideology actually aligns with a lot of black people, particularly black people in the South. So that neoliberalism, the seductiveness of neoliberalism, and the ability to use the financial markets, or the lure and the idea that you'll be able to make and generate wealth in this system, that pipe dream, that's deeply rooted in the black community. The black community is overwhelmingly religious, and I'm giving you like 20 reasons, right? I'm laying them out. The black community is overwhelmingly religious, and for the last 20, 30 years, the prevailing theology in the black churches has been a prosperity gospel. And that prosperity gospel is actually, as Eddie Glaude Jr. said, is perfect for neoliberalism. And so it's the if you're wealthy, it's because you prayed hard enough. Goes perfectly with if you're wealthy, that's because you were smarter and you worked hard enough. So for all of those reasons, and I think I mentioned the Red Scare, the scare of communism. If I didn't, that was used as well. For all of those reasons, it was an easy win for Hillary Clinton in the black community. if there was a black progressive with the same exact values, positions, policy positions as Bernie Sanders, could he or she have won? Yeah, absolutely. The only thing they would have had a fight against is that 30-year-long relationship that the Clintons had. But she could not have forwarded this false narrative of racism, right? She could not have forwarded the false narrative of I forgot. I listed so many I can't even remember everything I said. But that black individual could have gone to all of these black churches and connected instantly in that pulpit. That's something I said Bernie Sanders should have done a long time ago, which was to go to almost every single black church in this country of a modest and to a large size and connect with the black church from a Torah perspective, the Old Testament perspective. He could have done it. I don't think they did it in any significant way. So could a black progressive have done it? Absolutely. It's going to take a progressive of color to actually beat back against neoliberalism, because neoliberalism has perfected neoliberal multiculturalism, and they have perfected the identity politics game. All right, now all the way off topic, and we'll come back and it'll tie into the show. But for now, let me bring up my homegirl, Anoa Chonga, and we want to talk about the Supreme Court decisions. And after we talk about the Supreme Court decisions, we'll get into the conversation with Rania Khalek on this letter to the DNC, and then I'll close out with the information on what is it? The racist attitudes of Hillary Clinton supporters. Okay. Oh, there we go. I've got video. We have video, and the only question is, do I have audio? So we'll give her a second. Always a pleasure to have my friend and my colleague, my sister from another mister, Anoa Chonga. As soon as she's, oh, there we go. Flip your camera the other way. There we go. Put it vertical. Put it the long way. Yeah, we're doing this live on air. We're live. Here we go. All right, now I can bring your video.
I'm a little.
Okay, I've got you now. Anoa, what's going on, sis?
Nothing much. How are you?
I'm doing good. Someone just asked me a question, and I had to give a mini thesis on.
I was listening. I want to be like, well.
I should write that up, man. I should just write that up and put that in a book.
We'll have to transcribe it.
Yeah, definitely do that. All right, so I did a really horrible job of breaking down, or actually, I don't even think I really tried. I wanted to wait for you, but I know last night was your night. You know, you have to have time for your family.
It was boo time. We had to get caught up on Game of Thrones. Everybody just heard me talk a little bit about the Game of Thrones season finale at the end of my show. Right. Long story short version, some people out there talking about some Hillary Clinton is Khaleesi. Nah, she's Cersei. She's Cersei, okay? She's Cersei all the way down. She will put the wildfire underneath the temple and burn it all down if she can't get her way. So,
you know what's hilarious?
Anyway, yeah.
You know what's hilarious? Cases. I've never seen a single episode of Game of Thrones, and I don't imagine that I plan to. I don't like watching TV that much. I hate getting into series. I hate getting into series that last forever, and I always have to wait. Like, I absolutely hated what The Walking Dead did to us in our season finale. Like, I almost wanted to walk away forever, but I'm hooked on Walking Dead, and I just got hooked on Preacher on AMC. If you haven't watched Preacher is kick ass, and he cusses as much as I do.
Preacher is on our list. Preacher is on our list to watch. We were watching Game of Thrones last night, so we were a day behind trying to get caught up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
all right, so let's talk. Yes. Let's do what we're here to do. So, let's talk about some of the Supreme Court decisions. I talked about a little bit. Actually, I'll let you go. There's so many that just happened between Thursday and today. Which one do you want to talk about first?
So, the biggest one that really, has everyone excited about was the Supreme Court. I think it's Texas House Bill 2. Mm-hmm. What is it with all these people in these House Bill number 2s? But the Texas House bill, Supreme Court basically ruled that two of the restrictions that were implemented by this law were unconstitutional. They're unconstitutional restrictions on women's right to access involved in terms of birth control. I mean, not birth control, in terms of abortion. Now, the two provisions had to do with admitting privileges, and basically stating that doctors performing abortions had to have admitting privileges at a local hospital in that immediate area. That was ruled to not have anything to do, like Texas claimed, like, oh, this is about, the health and safety of women getting abortions, and this is the reason why we have to do these. But as I've talked about last week, they unduly restricted the access to abortions, where you had maybe as many as 40 clinics. It was reduced with the law in effect. It was reduced to only 10 across the entire state. Texas is a huge state, and they only had 10 clinics open, and this disproportionately impacted women of color and poor women as well. But it also drove up the cost of care. So that was one. One was the admitting privileges, and then the other one was that they had to have hospital standard operating facilities and equipment, I believe it was. And that is just unnecessary, because the type of it's not like they're doing surgical hospital level procedures. So it was unduly burdensome, and the state just did not bear out in terms of the level of scrutiny involved in this case. So there have been plenty of restrictions on women's ability to get abortion all across the country. By several different cases, but this is a Fifth Circuit case. So this Fifth Circuit case, this would apply to, even though it's a specific Texas law, arguably it would apply to other cases that have similar restrictions, can now be challenged, using this as precedent. But I thought it was really interesting because, we've had so much concern over these court cases, as we saw with the immigration ruling last week, the 4-4. What happens when you get a 4-4? You end up, the lower court decision ends up, being just ends up saying. In this case, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals case, which upheld the Texas law, would have, but for the Supreme Court's action, the Fifth Circuit's court's decision would have remained in place, and that would have left women in Texas with limited access to care. And when there's all types of considerations and problems that happen when you have lack of access to care, when people cannot afford to get the care that we need. It sends us, people have been concerned about sending us back to a dark age, to a period where people were, self-performing abortions, back alley, just all types of the unimaginable, but it just unduly burdens rights and access. There's a really interesting piece in a progressive Christian blog I follow that talked about how
I'm sorry, hang on.
When you look at
you follow a conservative, or is it progressive? You said
progressive. It's progressive.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, it was just really interesting how conservatives were upset with Donald Trump because he didn't have anything to say about the court ruling yesterday. He was mum on it yesterday. I didn't check to see if he had anything to say today, but they were really upset that he did not say anything about the ruling at all. That leads me to believe one of two things: either that he's just really stupid and doesn't pay attention, which that's possible, or that he's not as frothing at the mouth conservative anti-choice as he pretends to be.
Well, that's the accusation. That's the accusation. There's a lot of
evidence of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of conservative Christians who just firmly don't believe that Donald Trump is. I mean, hell, he didn't even know what 2 Corinthians was. He pronounced it 2 Corinthians. So, I mean, they should already know. They should know by how he has never had any public any regard for any type of Christian traditions in public. So anyway, go ahead. What's the next one? What's the next one on your list?
So the next one is the case, everyone's saying it's the case that bans domestic violence abusers from being able to have guns.
Right.
I'm trying to look for the actual case name. But in that case, what it is again, these are looking at state law provisions and basically interpreting whether or not state law can be interpreted a certain way. And basically what in this case, it was the fact that not that domestic people convicted of a domestic violence crime across the board cannot possess a gun, but per this state regulation, this state law, did a certain type of domestic violence crime and, this type of misdemeanor count as the types of crimes under the statute that forbade people from having guns. And in this case, on these facts, the Supreme Court said, yes, it did. So it's not this broad ruling where nobody who has ever had, it's not that broad. Mm-hmm. It is very specific to these types of situations. So, in several different states, people may have the same wording in legislation. So it could apply to other places, but it's not as broad sweeping as everyone seems to believe it was. It was. Yeah, I saw people say like, "Wow, domestic. This is great. Domestic." It's still again, it's another issue with the case with the court we have with the 4-4 split, the potential for the 4-4 split, or for Kennedy or Breyer to go the other way, or both of them to go the other way. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? For that, if that happens, because that's what happened with the Fourth Amendment case, with the searches and the legal search and seizure case. They both went the other way, and finding that was a permissible expansion of the ability what's considered reasonable search or seizure. So you could have had that situation in this case as well, but based on the facts and the law at hand, you did not. And so we're sitting here. We've had some relatively good cases with an 8-judge court,
right?
That like the affirmative action case last week. Stay mad, Abby. Becky with the bad grades.
Becky with the bad grades.
But Becky with the bad grades. But one case that kind of has rocked everyone, I guess I mentioned the immigration case from last week, the 4-4. It leaves a lot of families in limbo. There'll have to be another challenge, and hopefully, they can figure out a workaround, but it's highly problematic. But in this case, the other case that really just floored everyone, and this was a unanimous decision of the court. The corruption conviction of former governor of Virginia,
Bob McDonald,
was vacated. Bob McDonald was vacated. And what they're saying is that this could set the bar higher. This could make dealing with public corruption cases a lot more difficult. We just saw that a former New York Assemblyman was sentenced to 12 years. There's another one that was just sentenced to 5 years. There are all types of ethics investigations. There's tons of issues. But part of the problem is that, he took loans and gifts from businessmen while he was in office. He arranged meetings, with state officials. But what this decision turns on, though, is the fact that they're saying that his jury and his trial was not given correct instructions on the meaning of an official act. So the court is saying that this is actually a very narrow decision and is really dependent upon the facts of the case. Again, a lot of times that's what happens. The decisions of the court can be very, very fact specific, and they can be extremely narrow. It might be a really great ruling. It may just not apply to what is going on in your instance.
Yeah.
But so it goes back down. So it goes back down. They're reviewing the McDonald decision. They're trying to figure out what official actions, in terms of like the state of New York is like reviewing it, for example, since they have these cases pending now that they're dealing with, and how that determination will, if at all, impact the prosecutions they have pending for public corruption cases. So,
well, right there,
when we talk about accountability.
Well, actually, I was reading earlier today that it's also going to be the attorney for Rod Blagojevich. They're going to try to apply this decision in an appeal. So this could have, even though it's specific, it's a very specific case.
Could have. It does.
There's a lot of people who have been convicted who are elected officials. So even though it's narrow, there's probably going to be a lot of trials that are, or a lot of appeals rather, that are going to try to use this decision.
They're definitely going to try and use the language, the rationale, the arguments. They're definitely going to try and give this a whole nother go. They can try and say it's narrow if they want to, but they definitely opened the door. And we talk about holding people accountable for what they do, really, really making government accountable, having a checks and a balance. This makes it, if we make it easy for public officials to kind of wiggle out of when they do, bad acts, this makes it very difficult to hold people accountable. This really makes it difficult to protect the sanctity of the office and make sure that people are doing what they're put in office to do and not building their brands or expanding their business opportunities. I mean, it's really problematic on so many levels.
And I was
so
so
those
surprised.
Were the three.
I was so surprised that was a unanimous decision. That's what took me aback. So I guess based on the way they decided, or based on what that case turned on, which was the jury instructions. I guess it was more of a legal procedure question, and so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised that it was a unanimous decision, even though it seems to be something conservatives are heralding as they
are very excited about it, and it does happen. They are very excited about it, and it does happen. But I mean, jury instructions are. It's an interesting thing because you have jury instructions. You have people who try and challenge jury instructions, and you really have to. It's not just that the fact that the jury instructions were not correct. It's also the fact that was a crux of the ability to convict him. Like what they got wrong was something that was central to the case, right?
Okay.
Because you have people who are convicted of crimes who try to, whether it's faulty eyewitnesses, people who falsified testimony, poor jury instructions, all types of stuff, who are still sitting in prison. They don't have vacated convictions. They don't get Supreme Court appeals. So, I mean, this is also the example of having, high-powered attorneys being someone of a privileged position as well. It seems like this is an instance where the system is really set up to protect itself and not necessarily protect people. But when you think about jury instructions, I mean, they need to be accurate because you need to give juries the exact directions. Funny story, real quickly. When I was in law school, I took trial ad, and in our final trial, you do a mock trial in front of someone presiding, either someone who's a volunteer judge, or we actually had some judges locally who volunteered to do our trials too. Anyway, we had hashed out in pre-trial conference our jury instructions. It was a mock murder trial. We were defense counsel. So we hashed out we did our motions in limine. We argued around the jury instructions, and I successfully argued to get one particular instruction thrown out. I said, they have not made their, they can't, you can't give this. And she was like, okay, I agree, and we threw it out. We get to the trial. She gets us to read the instructions, and they didn't teach you this in class, but they get to read the instructions. She reads the instruction that we agreed she would not, that I won the motion on, that she was not supposed to read. So, I mean, it's like theater. You're acting. It's not like anyone's life is on really line, but you're really in character. So I object. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to object when the judge is reading jury instructions, and everybody's like, I don't know how this will go over in a real trial, but you did the right thing, because that's appealable error. She read a jury instruction that she was not supposed to read, and when we were in at the end, you get reviews, and everybody was looking at me like, I can't believe you just objected. I was like, but it was wrong, and my client, because there was something that they would have automatically the way it was, but they didn't actually prove that element, right? And so my judge was like, she was like, you were right to do that. She goes, I don't know that I would really appreciate that in real life, but you were right to do it. So the jury instructions are really serious. And as an attorney, I mean, you really got to be vigorous. So the fact that the instruction did not specifically define, or, when you have legal terms of art, it really has to be drilled down to the meat and bones for jurors to make sure they're making, a proper decision. And then at the end of the day, it's also on the judge too, to make sure that they're making the right legal determinations been made. So, I mean, so procedurally, this probably was the right decision. Otherwise it kind of sucks if, McDonald's just off completely.
Just off.
Free. Yeah.
Noah, thank you for helping me with those 3 cases. There are so many other cases we probably need to go through.
There's so many other cases, but I appreciate you for having me come on.
Oh, my
That's
pleasure.
Great.
I know everybody knows where to get up with you, but you know the custom. Tell everybody where to get up with you.
Check me out on Twitter, Miss Nono ESQ. Don't blame Ben for what I tweet, or what I write, or what I say. Have a good night, you guys.
All right. Thanks so much. 857-600-0518. In a minute, I'm going to be joined by Rania Khalek, and we're going to this is pretty much the opening conversation, in my opinion, on this letter. I mean, because there's so much to unpack with regards to the letter that friend of the show, Bakari Sellers, got 60 African-American politicians to sign on in support of Israel. in support, not even, I'm sorry, let me be more specific, not in support of Israel, but in support of a very specific set of language in the Democratic platform. So I've been joined by Rania. Rania, thank you so much for joining me at the last second. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So it's always an eventful day. It's a big year, big election year. But you and I were both caught off guard. I think you found it first, and you wrote it up in your piece on your site about this letter. So again, now full transparency for everyone watching. Bakari has already agreed to come on the show and discuss it, but we may not be able to lock in with him until next week. So we still wanted to talk about it tonight. And Bakari, if you're watching, feel free to call in, and we'll chop it up on air. So with that being said, how are you, first of all, and tell me about the piece and what are you thinking about it?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's just another day in the neighborhood.
I like that answer. So yeah, I really do. I really hope Bakari follows through. I'm really looking forward to debating him on this issue. But yeah, so if people were paying attention over the weekend, the Democratic Platform Committee met so that they could vote on language to submit for the draft of the Democratic platform. And so they had a lot of, that was last Friday, there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of bickering over various issues. And unfortunately, a lot of progressive issues, you have there's 5 people on the committee who Bernie Sanders appointed. The rest were appointed by the DNC and Hillary Clinton, and for the most part support Hillary Clinton. And so it was pretty much an ideological battle, I think, over the various points. And one of those issues was Israel-Palestine. It came at night. It was the last issue to be discussed. And the Bernie people, they introduced an amendment to the language that's already in the draft of the platform, basically calling for a couple of things. One of the things that they wanted to do was they asked to add in language, basically calling for the end of Israel's decades-long military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. They called for the end of Israeli settlements, which has been illegal settlements, I should say, which have been an issue that have dramatically contributed to the conflict. And they called for a rebuilding of Gaza. Another issue that they brought up was so the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is Palestinian-led and is basically a nonviolent movement to try and pressure Israel to and its military occupation and its human rights abuses against Palestinians. There's language in the platform at the moment that basically states Democratic Party opposition to delegitimization of Israel at the UN and through BDS. And so that's what the language is now. And so the Bernie Sanders people wanted to have that removed. And so these were the requests they made. And it was shot down by the Clinton people, by the mostly Hillary Clinton supporters, the Bernie Sanders supporters. All 5 of them were the only ones who voted for it. And I mean, this is not something radical. Right. This is pretty basic. Like it's not like it's calling for something even I'd want. Like as far as I'd want, it's just saying what U.S. policy already says, which is that we want an end to the Israeli occupation. We want we want equality for both people, for Israelis and Palestinians. Israel needs to end its illegal settlement enterprise, and Gaza needs to be rebuilt. And that's it. I mean, that's not anything crazy or radical. Those are things that even President Obama says, right? So that was beat down because the Hillary Clinton wing of the party, which is the establishment of the party, is very much allied with Israel and allied with the right-wing regime in Israel, which is unfortunate. And so then we get to, sorry, I don't know if you want to jump in or if you want me to continue.
Well, actually, the only thing I want to jump in there on is the word occupation. There's a couple things I know you're going to get into in a second, but it's the word occupation that seems to be so problematic. Pope Francis actually gave a speech, I believe, either last week or over the weekend, where he described the same exact situation as occupation, and he even got attacked from so many different circles. Why? And just not to take you off on too far a tangent, but why do you think that specific word, despite the reality of it being, why is that specific word problematic?
Well, it's problematic for people who want to deny reality. It's problematic for people who are hawkish on the issue of Israel. There is for many people, they don't even believe there is an occupation. They believe that Palestinians are the ones who are occupying Israeli land.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes into just like another whole deep issue of the whole conflict. And the other issue is, calling it an occupation, which is what it is. I mean, it's a military occupation with checkpoints, and it's a suffocating occupation. So, occupation is probably not even a strong enough word to describe the machine, the military domination that exists in in an area like the West Bank. And Gaza is like a whole other kind of occupation. But that's what it is. I mean, the international community, without even getting into the details of that, the international community recognizes it as an occupation. The United States government recognizes it as a military occupation that's been ongoing for decades. But, the government in Israel is increasingly right-wing, and the right-wing elements in Israel, they don't want to withdraw. There used to be like most of Israel, most of the leadership in Israel used to at least talk about, in theory, at some point, 2 states. But the new elements that are in charge of Israel, the right-wing elements that are increasingly, some of them are even fascistic elements, they want all of the West Bank to be a part of Israel, and they want to basically annex it illegally. That's like another whole side of the situation.
In your piece, you actually pointed out that this is something that's also supported by progressive or liberal voices in the Jewish communities. Could you expound on that very briefly, and then we'll go into the conversation about the letter from Bakari?
So the issue of Israel-Palestine, for your viewers who aren't familiar, basically the issue, it's an issue of settler colonialism, if that's like the easiest way to understand it. You have one side, Israel, that has for decades since its creation has been trying to basically maximize its demographic majority, its Jewish demographic majority over an area of land that is not historically majority Jewish. So there's all these people who are Palestinians who are indigenous to this area, and what's happened is that Israel has this system. I mean, the occupation is a part of it, but Israel has been basically slowly, incrementally, since its creation, when it kicked out 750,000 Palestinians and refused to allow them to come back. Since then, it's been expanding. It's an expansionist state. And so it's been corralling Palestinians into smaller and smaller areas of their own land, and taking their land and building settlements, which are illegal settlements, Jewish-only settlements. And so that's that's the problem. That's the situation in the most basic, simple way I can describe it. And so in the U.S., Jewish Americans have been historically very, and they still are very, very, like, they're probably one of the most liberal demographic groups aside from Black Americans, that vote Democratic. But Israel has been a very important issue in that community. And so there's been this like dynamic of, supporting a very liberal America that's multicultural, while at the same time supporting this like ethnically exclusivist state in Israel. And so you have these liberal, or at least self-identified liberal, like Jewish communal organizations and lobbying groups that are liberal on domestic policy in the U.S., but then when it comes to Israel-Palestine, they feel like there has to be a Jewish state. And in order for there to be a Jewish state, there has to be a Jewish majority. And in order for there to be a Jewish majority, you have to basically make sure that the number of Palestinians never exceeds the number of Jews. I mean, and that's where you get into that's probably one of the most horrible, disgusting parts of the whole Israel-Palestine situation, is this demographic manipulation. And so you have groups that are very invested in the idea of a 2-state solution, because to them, they understand that if there's a 1-state solution, which is kind of what already exists, it's just one state where millions of people, Palestinians, don't have rights over the people that rule them. But they want a 2-state solution so that the demographics never change, because if you have a 1-state reality, and at some point you're going to have to give rights to all the Palestinians there, and then at that point it would upend the Jewish majority. So that's why you have groups like J Street that are so invested in the 2-state solution, to the point where where it's just that's become almost it's become you just always hear the mantra 2-state solution, even though it's there's no realistic way of it happening. And so that's what I was talking about in my piece, is these organizations that claim to be liberal, but they don't care about, they want to oppose BDS. And so that's another thing, is the BDS movement calls for, giving Palestinian refugees the right to return. And so if you did that, again, you would upend the Jewish majority. And so that's why groups like J Street are so opposed to BDS, and that's why they actually pushed for language in the Democratic platform to, vocally oppose BDS.
Okay, so they were opposed to BDS, but they weren't opposed to the word occupation. According to, if I'm reading your piece correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, they were okay with the word occupation, but they were also okay with it not being in there.
Okay. They
but
weren't
at the
gonna
same time,
fight
the
for it.
BDS thing was really big. They were happy with the Hillary Clinton language that ended up in the platform.
And interestingly enough, it's the BDS portion, and I guess I'm giving some stuff away here, that really caught my attention in the letter from Bakari Sellers, and specifically because of how boldly Cornel West came out in support of the BDS movement and in support of the plight of Palestinians in general, so much so that he could not endorse or vote for the platform. So let's shift gears and now talk about the letter, because there's so many different facets and angles that we could have this conversation about the letter from Bakari Sellers and the 60 Democratic, African-American Democratic elected officials. What did you find, and take it from there?
So, you know, you've read the letter. I actually haven't had a chance to see it yet. I've been trying to, but it's been difficult. But from what I understand, just from what's been reported about that letter, I actually was not aware of the BDS portion of it. But the whole point of it is that Cornel West, okay, so Bernie Sanders appointed Cornel West, and like you said, he's a very vocal proponent of BDS and a very vocal proponent of Palestinian rights. Mm-hmm. And so he has taken that into the platform hearings. And so what you've had these very public hearings with, you know, people who are very, you know, powerful, influential, you know, establishment Democrats, mm-hmm. having to listen to someone like Cornel West say things that they're not used to having to listen to.
Absolutely.
And, you know, he's been confronting them in a ways that this, in my lifetime, I should say, I've never, ever seen people who are this high level, you know, in the Democratic Party be confronted with the kinds of things that Cornel West is saying outside of a protest.
Right.
So you know, there's been video. Obviously, this has been airing live in places like C-SPAN. And so video footage of this has really gone viral. And people are just like, you know, it's actually kind of exhilarating to watch. It's like it's political theater in a lot of ways, you know? And so this has been making the rounds. It's gone viral and people are watching. And, you know, some people who are very pro Bernie Sanders who maybe didn't really understand the dynamics or even really know about Israel Palestine are watching this and recognizing, okay, like this is an issue of oppression, right? Mm-hmm. Like maybe something that they didn't know before. And so that is scary for the Democratic Party, especially the Hillary Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. Because, you know, this is what's happening. I mean, there's a trend where polls have been showing that liberal Democrats are increasingly supportive of Palestinian rights to the point where the most recent poll shows that liberal Democrats, particularly those voting for Bernie Sanders, actually support Palestinians more than they do Israelis, which is like completely unprecedented.
Wow.
And so this is basically the progressive base of the Democratic Party is changing on this issue dramatically and very, very fast. That number of liberals who support Palestinians has doubled in the last 2 years. And so what you have is that sentiment it's inching its way up. And that's what you see in Cornel West being appointed and being able to say this at the Democratic platform hearing, as you see the grassroots really inching its way up on what, you know, is in a lot of ways the third rail of American politics. This is the one issue that you're just not allowed to talk about. And so that's why this letter took place, because Cornel West is also, you know, he's basically a celebrity civil rights activist and scholar and author and Black radical. And, you know, despite his qualms with Obama, you know, he's still considered somebody who's admired in the Black community. Mm-hmm. And so when you have the letter, you know, when you have a letter like the one that Bakari spearheaded or wrote being signed by all these people, the message is that don't listen to Cornel West. Don't listen to that Black guy. Listen to these Black leaders. And so that was an attempt to really like undercut the effectiveness of Cornel West's testimony at these hearings.
Yeah, that was my gut reaction. And that's still where I fall on the spectrum. And Bakari knows that I completely disagree with the with this image of 60 Black elected officials, almost as though it's a voice of the Black community. And whether that was intentional or not, that's really how it can be played. So much so that if now Bernie Sanders or Zogby or well, not even Cornel West, but just say someone who's not African American speaks out against it, it can be spun like a swift boat. It can just be spun in a racial narrative, the same games that we've been playing for a very long time in this election.
This is a pattern right? So this is a pattern that has emerged this election beyond Israel-Palestine. I mean, this is something that we've been seeing where Hillary Clinton surrogates are almost always, I mean, we've talked about this on the show before, but it's almost always, you know, either minorities or women being put forth to oppose leftist policies. And then that way, like you said, you can sort of put it in this racial lens of, oh, like the leaders of this community, of this minority community or this minority community support this. So as like a white people, we can't, or as anybody, you know, we can't. That's the voice of that community. And we've seen it particularly with Black elected officials. I mean, you know, you had John Lewis when the Congressional Black Caucus endorsed Hillary, calling into question Bernie Sanders' civil rights record. Then you had, I think it was Clyburn, trying to say that, you know, free college was something that was going to be bad for historically Black colleges, right? Which is like totally something that I can't imagine him saying outside of this election process. And then you also have it recently where, you know, you have the CBC leadership writing a letter opposing removing superdelegates from the Democratic primary process. And so you've seen this, like the Hillary Clinton campaign has really been trying to use these various ways that they're trying to leverage her support among Black and brown communities. And it's happened with like Latino communities too. I mean, when Jane Sanders went to go visit the tent city in Maricopa County in Arizona and Sheriff Joe Arpaio showed up, you had Louis Gutierrez holding or sending a letter to like the media claiming that she got a tour from Arpaio and that the Bernie Sanders campaign was allied with Joe Arpaio. You know, like it's really actually, I find really, really offensive and insulting that this is what this has come to on the Democratic side of this primary is with one side really trying to leverage her support among minority voters to try and put everything in a racial lens so that it's just this really divisive. If you support changing the Democratic platform language on Israel, maybe that can be construed as racist because you're opposing the will of Black leaders. Like that's, you know, the logical outcome of that, you know, with the way that this election process has been going.
And the best, and what I want to do is I just kind of want to, I'm going to speak on Bakari's behalf right now and say it's perhaps, you know, perhaps these 60 people, perhaps Bakari and the rest of the people who signed onto this letter simply agree with the original language, and they, for whatever reason, they believe in that original language, and they would say that the Black community is not monolithic, and just like we have Cornel West, who is a fierce defender and advocate for Palestine, you also have African Americans in America who are fierce advocates for Israel, and they fall on that side of the equation. I'm sure that's going to be one of the things that he says. And so what would you say to that, number one? And then I have a couple things that I would say to my own proposition there. Go ahead.
Well, of course, yeah, the Black community, no community in this country is monolithic as much as, you know, the media portrays it that way. So, of course, you know, there are elements of the Black community that support Israel, elements that support Palestine, elements that don't really care. I think that's probably the case for most communities. I think that there is some power when it comes to, there's an extra added layer of power to the issue of Israel-Palestine when you have Black civil rights leaders speaking on it, right? Because especially on the issue of Palestine, because, you know, Black Lives Matter, for example, has been very much like allied with the issue of Palestine, and there's been delegations going to visit there, and they do see this very much in the lens of civil rights, and that's what it is at the end of the day. It's civil rights. You have people that are being denied basic rights, and that's how people like Cornel West see it. I mean, that's the reality on the ground. And so the fact that they were trying to specifically undercut Cornel West, I mean, there wasn't, you know, that's what this was about.
Yeah.
There wasn't, it's not like, it, you know, that, and you had, I mean, you could have undercut Cornel West in other ways. Instead of having like Jewish groups, you know, having Jewish groups write a letter, it was specifically Black lawmakers writing a letter. And so it was just like trying to pit, I feel like, you know, identity against identity to try and say, no, we're the representatives. Like to tell the Clinton people on the Democratic Platform Committee, no, we are the representative of the Black community, not Cornel West. Listen to us. I
mean, historically, that's always been the case, a competition between who's going to be the voice of the Black community. And there is no singular voice of the Black community. Cornel West himself is clearly not the voice of the Black community. But oftentimes what happens, and I know you've experienced this firsthand, is if there's a countervailing force, voice, that's saying something that's counter to the approved narrative, those voices will be erased right? And so there was a need, in my opinion, and Bakari will speak for himself, but in my opinion, there was a need to present a counter voice to Cornel West, because they couldn't erase Cornel West. Like they can so easily erase all of our minor voices out here who don't have those significant platforms. They could just erase the fact that there are plenty of women who don't support Hillary Clinton's platform or Hillary Clinton, plenty of African Americans who stand in complete solidarity with Palestine, right? They want to completely erase that portion and give a representation that it is the black community, and the black community stands with Hillary Clinton, and the black community stands with Israel, when in actuality, there is a rich legacy that goes so far back, generations of African Americans standing, not generations, but decades of African Americans standing with the Palestinian people. So, you know, it's a very frustrating situation, in my opinion, because it feels like it's one more domino in that chain of narratives that have been spun for against Bernie Sanders, and more than Bernie Sanders, but what he stands for. And in this case, a very progressive position on Palestine. And I
would say the most progressive position in all of the Senate, definitely the most. I mean, what he's done is pretty historic. Like, no one's ever gone this far on this high of a platform, again, at least in my lifetime. You know, especially someone like Bernie Sanders, of all people, who 2 years ago was like shouting down hecklers people were heckling him about the issue of Gaza. He was like telling them to shut up. And the where he's gone from there for, you know, in just a short time span is incredible. And he's taken it to the point where on a national stage, of a debate stage, a national debate stage during a presidential election, as a candidate, a competitive candidate, you know, challenge the orthodoxy on the most taboo issue when it comes to American politics.
And that's for me, that is the most telling thing, that it is taboo. It is that third rail. You can't talk about it. If you talk about it and not talk about it from the the ordained narrative, then you are isolated, and everything is done possible to erase your voice or marginalize your voice. So Rania, listen, thanks so much for coming on. We kind of went into it a little bit, but we'll go into it a lot deeper. I know Bakari has already agreed to it, and you've agreed to it. So just again, to have a conversation on not only this letter, but the underlying issues underneath it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and thanks so much again for having me on. It's always fun to come on and chat.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation and talk about anything that we've covered tonight so far. Yeah, so okay, so I want to give an update here. I'm just getting that one of the candidates that Bernie Sanders has endorsed has won their primary, and I want to pull up the data. Zephyr Teachout has won her primary in New York, and let me see if I have any of the data on the actual breakdown. Okay, so I don't have the data of the actual breakdown yet, but this is great news. She was one of the, I believe, 8 candidates that Bernie Sanders endorsed on the same day. He had already previously endorsed 3 candidates, including Lucy Flores, but then there was a second group of candidates that Bernie Sanders endorsed, including Zephyr Teachout. And so she has won her primary. I believe it's Dutchess County, New York. But if I got that wrong, then I'm sure somebody in the comment section will correct me. Okay, 857-600-0518. So I have to talk about the survey, right? So there was and this is all connected to the conversation that we just had with Rania and with the very first caller. And again, let me start here. I'm going to give these caveats and disclaimers, right? I'm going to give them because I just want to be sure that you're clear. Number one, I think it is our duty to call our leaders out and not be cheerleaders for our leaders, period. period. That's the end of the conversation. I am personally, I do have admiration for a specific group of leaders, including Barack Obama, but that admiration should never put me in a position where I cannot call him out when he's wrong. So just so you understand where I'm coming from. I don't personally have that type of admiration for Hillary Clinton, except for political Machiavellianism. Like she is a political, I think she's a political ninja, ruthless. And I do have some admiration for that because I'm a student of political science and I recognize game. So from that perspective, I have some admiration for her. But in terms of her policies and what she wants to do for America, not at all. And that being said, if I'm going to critique President Obama while he's in office, you better goddamn believe I'm going to critique Hillary Clinton while she's running for president and while she is in the White House, period. For those two reasons alone, that it's our duty as citizens and journalists and citizen journalists that we critique our leaders and not be cheerleaders for our leaders. And then two, she is not somebody that I have great admiration for. I just have a kind of a respect for her because of her political prowess. Now, for everyone who's saying that this means I support Donald Trump, please don't be that obtuse. Go to another channel where the analysis may be a little more simplistic, but don't come to me with that foolishness, because opposing and critiquing specific policies that Hillary Clinton represents and stands for does not equal supporting Donald Trump. Asking me to choose between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, I was thinking on the elevator coming up today, that's like asking me to choose if I want to get shot in the head or suffocate. I don't want either result, but if I have to go one way, suffocation is the worst in my opinion. All right, all the caveats and disclaimers out the way. I will absolutely call Team Hillary Clinton out on the racist attitudes of her supporters, particularly because of how race was manipulated in this race for, ding, 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 ding. Now I know what I'm going to talk about. Sorry, side note, I have to be somewhere later this week and speak, and now I know what I'm going to talk about. But the racist attitudes of Hillary Clinton supporters that has been documented now by two different surveys. The first one was from the ANES, the American National Election Survey, something I forgot the exact title, but I'll bring it up on the screen in a minute. And this survey actually came out, it was performed in January, and we began discussing it in June, this month, beginning of this month. We began discussing it, and it showed that Hillary Clinton supporters were far more racist and had worse racial attitudes or racial animus towards African Americans than Bernie Sanders supporters. Now, a different survey just came out from Reuters today. The Reuters survey showed, out of a survey of 60,000 people, that Hillary Clinton supporters have worse racial attitudes towards African Americans than John Kasich's, the Republican John Kasich. Now, to be fair with the data, it's actually within the margin of error with John Kasich. However, to be in the margin of error with John Kasich supporters with regard to your perceptions of African Americans is nothing to scoff at. It's nothing to brag about. It's nothing to say, oh, well, we're not actually worse than John Kasich supporters. We're actually the same as John Kasich supporters, especially when your entire campaign has been about the manipulation of racial narratives to suppress progressive voices. American National Election Studies. I was close. I try to do, listen, 90% of what I do is from straight memory. I usually don't have any notes. One day I will have enough time to have notes and be far more accurate. Okay. So, but for right now, I got off of work at 6 o'clock and I just barely got here. So, but thank you. American National Election Studies. Owen, you can cut that little section out. All right. All of those caveats, all of those disclaimers, let's go to the data. All right, to be sure, this data is racial attitudes of the presidential candidate supporters. It is a survey that was conducted by Reuters, and it was a survey of 60,000. Pardon me. No, it was a survey of. The numbers don't add up here, but the report from Reuters actually says 60,000, but I'm looking at the numbers here and it actually adds up to something different, but I digress. First, the question, intelligence, the percentage of supporters that view blacks as less intelligent than whites. Now, of course, first of all, let's be clear. No surprise here. Donald Trump has the most racist followers. Okay, so that's not even anything to compare. We already established that. Hell, the Michael Heisenbeck, Heimbach, the leader of the Traditionalist Workers Party, the white nationalist that led and organized the protests the violent protest in Sacramento. He is a fervent Donald Trump supporter, and they are going to the Republican National Convention to support Donald Trump. So there should be no surprise that the Klan and white supremacists rally behind Donald Trump, and therefore their base will have the most racist perceptions of African Americans, right? So he's the outlier. Let's get back to the data. Hillary Clinton's, as you can see on this graph, Hillary Clinton is just shy of the results for Ted Cruz, and she is higher. Her supporters have a higher view, a percentage of supporters who view blacks as less intelligent. Hang on a second for me, guys. Hold that thought. Let me do something here. Yep. Doing it live on the air. Hillary Clinton. The graphics are too small for me. I can't see the actual percentages, and I want to give you guys the actual percentages. All right. So in the meantime, this is going to be a great section for my editor to cut out for the video after the fact. But for now, I have to go look at the actual data because the graphic is too small. Here we go. That's the one I need. Okay, let's go back to the data. While this article slowly, very slowly loads up. Okay, so the first graphic you see has the percentage of supporters that view blacks as less intelligent. It has, among all respondents, 22.5% threshold. You have Hillary. In terms of violence, Hillary Clinton supporters are, again, just above the 30% threshold, just in parity with John Kasich, just outside of the margin of error for Ted Cruz. This is for a campaign that views or used race as who masterfully used race as a means of, and John Kasich, they are just within the margin of error of each other. John Kasich is just below 26.8%, and Hillary Clinton's supporters are just below that, but still within the margin of error. And last but not least, did we cover them all? So work ethic, lawfulness. Lawfulness. The percentage of supporters that view blacks as more criminal than white. John Kasich's supporters are at 30%. Hillary Clinton supporters are above 30%, at about 32%. And still, they are within the margin of error. So we can't affirmatively say that Hillary Clinton supporters are worse than John Kasich supporters. We can say that Hillary Clinton supporters share just about the same point of view on blacks as John Kasich. And because that was so small, I probably would do this again and upload it as a separate video. But I want to compare it to the last survey, the survey that I talked about on the very first, I believe it was June 1st. White supporters of Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, additional views on race, part 2. This was part of the American National Election Studies. How well does the word lazy describe most members of each group? And this particular group they were discussing were blacks. White Clinton supporters said 43% said moderately, very, or extremely well. 18% of her supporters said that lazy describes African Americans very or extremely. Bernie Sanders supporters, 20% said moderately, very, or extremely well, with only 9% saying very or extremely. So 43% of Hillary Clinton supporters believe that African Americans are lazy at some level or another. 20% of Bernie Sanders supporters. Still nothing to laugh about or to brag about Bernie Sanders supporters, but it's better than Hillary Clinton's Klan. No pun intended. How well does the word violent describe most members of each group? Well, white Hillary Clinton supporters, 46% said that they believe moderately so, very much so, or extremely well that violent describes African Americans. 31% said very or extremely. White Bernie Sanders supporters, 26%. So you have a 20-point difference between Hillary Clinton supporters, and yes, that is well outside of the margin of error. The last question: Irish, Italians, Jewish, and many other minorities overcame prejudice and worked their way up. Blacks should do the same without any special favors. White Clinton supporters, 55% agreed. White Bernie Sanders supporters, and this is the worst one for Bernie Sanders supporters, 45% agreed. For a team that, now, first of all, Bernie Sanders supporters, I said this on the very first video when I talked about this, and I'll say it again. You've got to fix those numbers, right? As progressives who are fighting against people who can very much easily cast a narrative on you that you are racist bros, then it becomes your responsibility to undermine that false narrative by confronting the latent racism that is in America. It's here. Let's not pretend it's not here. However, 2 surveys now from 2 different sources, one from Reuters and one from the ANES, have drawn somewhat of the same conclusion. Different questions, but they are similar enough to say that Hillary Clinton supporters have a more racist view of African Americans. And when you think about that in light of the way race has been used in this campaign to the detriment of African Americans, to the detriment of progressivism, to the detriment of the working class blacks and working class whites, when you think about that, then surveys like this should make you upset. It should make you upset because the truth was on our side, and yet the political spin was not. And that's because in a lot of ways, I said it last night, I'll say it again, we were not prepared. But now we know, and they should not be able to run this game on us more than once. We should be very much prepared, not only for this attack, but for any subsequent attack that is used to try to create and further, not create, but further divisions based on race, specifically for the purposes of suppressing a progressive narrative. All right. I think I'm done. Talk to you next time.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.